In the summer of 1985, Daniel and Valerie Mercer rented a quiet house for a week, bringing along their friends Greg and Nenah for what was supposed to be a peaceful escape. The place was old but clean, tucked behind tall hedges, with one feature the owner bragged about more than anything else: the pool. It sat in the backyard like a slab of black glass. Too still. Too deep. By the time the sun went down on the first night, all four of them had already said the same thing without meaning to. The deep end looked deeper than it should have been. The caretaker, Ellen Pike, arrived before dark, with spare towels and a ring of brass keys. She gave them the usual rules in a flat voice: no glass near the pool, no diving after drinking, and if they heard anything outside after midnight, they were not to investigate it. Greg laughed at that, but Ellen never smiled. Instead, she looked at the water and said very softly that the deep end had a habit of calling people by what they miss most. Then she left before anyone could ask what that meant. That first night, they sat outside under the patio lights, drinking beer and listening to the hum of insects. Greg was the first to mention the sound. He thought he heard somebody whispering from the water. Nenah said she heard it too, but it sounded farther away, like a voice trying to travel up from the bottom. Daniel leaned toward the pool and listened. For a second, he was sure he heard his dead brother's voice saying his name. When he jerked back, the water was perfectly calm. Nobody slept well. Daniel woke sometime after 2 a.m. to the faint slap of water against tile. Valerie was still asleep beside him, but the bedroom curtains were moving even though the window was shut. He got up and looked down into the backyard. The pool lights were off, yet the deep end glowed with a dull bluish shimmer. There was someone in the water. He could see the shape clearly. Arms floating out, face turned up, body drifting in silence. Then the shape slowly sank straight down and disappeared. Daniel rushed outside with Greg, both of them barefoot and half awake. The deck was wet, though it hadn't rained. They searched the pool with the patio net and found nothing. Valerie and Nenah came down behind them, wrapped in robes, angry and frightened. Then Nenah noticed something on the diving board. A puddle had formed there in the shape of a human body. Not a random spill. A perfect outline, as if someone had been laid there dripping wet only moments before. Morning gave them no comfort. Tom Weller, the local maintenance man, arrived to check the filter after Ellen called him. He listened to their story in silence, then checked the pump, the drain, and the chemistry. Everything was normal. Before leaving, he crouched near the deep end and frowned at the water. He said the pool had been redug years earlier because the original bottom wasn't right. When Daniel asked what that meant, Tom only said the deep end always came back wrong. No matter how many times they fixed it, they tried to brush it off. Daylight made the whole thing feel foolish, so they spent the afternoon swimming and sunning themselves by the pool. But Daniel noticed something the moment he went into the deep end. The temperature changed. The shallow end was warm from the sun, but the water at the far end felt winter cold. Not refreshing cold, grave cold. When Greg joked and ducked under to touch the bottom, he came up pale, breathing hard, and swore somebody had grabbed his ankle. That evening, Nenah admitted she had a recurring dream the night before. In the dream, she stood at the edge of the pool and heard her mother's voice coming from underwater, begging for help. Her mother had drowned in a lake when Nenah was a child. No one said much after that. The silence around the table grew heavy. Eventually, Valerie asked the question all of them were avoiding. What if the pool wasn't showing them random things? What if it knew exactly what voice would make each of them lean closer? After midnight, the whispering returned. This time they all heard it. It rose from the deep end in overlapping threads, too faint to make out clearly, but unmistakably human. Daniel turned on the floodlight over the patio, and the voices stopped. Then the water bulged upward from the center of the deep end as if something large had exhaled beneath it. Greg, drunk and irritated, grabbed a flashlight and stepped closer. He shouted into the pool, telling whoever was messing with them to come out. The flashlight beam shook in his hand. It him was not a voice. It was a face beneath the surface, drifting up from the blackness. Pale, swollen, eyes open. Greg stumbled backward so fast he fell against the patio table. The others saw it, too. The face looked like Greg's father, dead for 9 years, floating just below the wavering surface. Greg stared as tears welled in his eyes. He whispered, "Dad?" And the face smiled. Not with comfort, not with love, with hunger. They ran inside and locked every door. In the kitchen, Valerie found Ellen's printed binder of house rules tucked in a drawer beside the phone book. Most of it was normal rental information, but a page had been added by hand. It warned that if anyone heard a familiar voice from the pool, they must never answer it aloud, never repeat what it says, never enter the water after midnight. At the bottom, in different handwriting, were 7 words. It learns your name when you listen. Nenah wanted to leave immediately, but Greg insisted they were frightening themselves. He'd been drinking, he said. They all had. The face in the water was a trick of light, a shared panic, an old story feeding their nerves. He stormed upstairs, angry that everyone was feeding the mood. An hour later, Daniel realized Greg hadn't come back down. Then they heard footsteps outside on the patio. Wet footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Crossing from the deep end toward the sliding glass door. Daniel froze. Greg was standing outside, drenched from head to toe, facing the glass. But Greg was also upstairs. Daniel could hear him walking around in the bedroom above. The man outside raised one hand and tapped gently on the glass. Water ran from his sleeve and pooled around his shoes. When he lifted his face, it was Greg's face, but waterlogged, stretched, and too still. Nenah screamed from upstairs at the exact same moment. The real Greg was gone. They found the upstairs bedroom empty, the window open, the curtains blowing inward. On the carpet beneath the window were wet footprints leading nowhere. Valerie called the police, but the storm rolling in had already knocked out the line. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and ran back outside despite Ellen's warning. Greg's double was gone. The pool had gone perfectly smooth again. Then from the deep end, Greg's voice cried out for help. It sounded panicked, desperate, very far away. Daniel nearly jumped in, but Valerie caught him by the arm. She reminded him of the note. The pool was listening. The pool was learning. Instead, they used the skimmer pole to probe the deep end from the deck. When the pole dipped into the center, Daniel felt resistance, like it had touched cloth or skin. Then something yanked the pole downward so hard it ripped from his hands and vanished beneath the surface. A second later, bubbles rose up in a violent burst, and Greg's wedding ring floated to the top. Nenah broke. She screamed Greg's name again and again, and had to be pulled inside. Valerie sat with her in the bedroom while Daniel searched the rest of the house for anything Ellen might have left behind. In the bathroom cabinet, behind spare towels, he found an old newspaper clipping. The article described several drowning deaths over the years, all at the same property, all in the deep end, and all under strange circumstances. Witnesses claimed the victims had seemed calm just before entering the water, as if responding to someone they trusted. As the storm worsened, the house lights flickered. Nenah fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, still clutching Greg's ring. Valerie stood at the bedroom window and watched rain dimple the water below. Then she saw movement in the pool. Greg was standing at the bottom of the deep end, upright, as if gravity no longer mattered. His clothes drifted around him. His face was turned toward her. Slowly, he raised one hand and beckoned her closer. Valerie staggered back from the window, but now she could hear a new voice from below. It wasn't Greg's. It was her father's, dead from a heart attack years ago, speaking in the gentle tone he used when she was sick as a little girl. He told her he was cold. He told her he needed her. He told her only she could help him. Daniel heard nothing at first, until the same voice began speaking to him too, word for word, from the hallway mirror. The voices spread through the house like damp air. From the bathroom drain, from the kitchen sink, from the rattling pipes in the walls. Every word led back to the same place, the deep end. Daniel and Valerie realized the pool was no longer waiting for them to come outside. It was pushing itself inward, filling the house with sound and memory. Then Nenah woke suddenly, opened her eyes, and said in a calm, flat voice, "Greg says he isn't alone down there." Before they could stop her, Nenah walked downstairs and out the back door barefoot, wearing only her nightgown and robe. She moved like a sleepwalker, her face slack, eyes open but distant. Daniel and Valerie chased her into the rain. Nenah stepped to the edge of the deep end and smiled through tears. She whispered, "Mom, Greg, I'm here." Then a white hand rose silently from the water and took hold of her wrist. Daniel lunged forward, but Nenah was pulled in with terrifying speed. The surface exploded as Daniel grabbed at Nenah's robe, catching only soaked fabric that tore in his hands. Valerie fell to her knees, screaming while Nenah thrashed once, twice, and then was dragged straight down, deeper than the pool should have allowed. Daniel jumped backward when he saw shapes moving below her. More than one, human forms circling in the cold dark beneath the deep end, all pale, all staring upward. For one lightning-lit instant, Greg was among them. Now only Daniel and Valerie remained. They barricaded the sliding door and sat in the kitchen until dawn should have come, but the storm made the night feel endless. Daniel wanted to run. Valerie wanted proof. She said if they left now, no one would believe them, and the house would just claim someone else next year. Together they returned to the shed and found several gallons of pool chemicals. If the pool remembered the drowned, then maybe they could scar its memory. In the rain, they poured chlorine, shock, and acid into the deep end until the fumes burned their lungs. The water hissed and frothed, turning milky and violent. For a moment it seemed to work. The whispering became shrill. Shapes churned beneath the surface. Then the entire deep end swelled upward like a living thing in pain. Greg's face rose again, followed by Nenah's, both fused in the water for a second before collapsing back into the churning blue. A voice boomed from the pool in dozens of overlapping mouths, speaking Daniel's full name. Valerie screamed for Daniel not to answer, but it was too late. Hearing his own name spoken in his dead brother's voice broke something in him. He stepped forward as though sleepwalking. Valerie wrapped both arms around him and dragged him back just as a surge of water came lashing over the coping like a reaching hand. Together they stumbled away from the pool, through the side gate, and out to the road barefoot in the pouring rain. Behind them, the water slapped and roared like something furious and awake. By sunrise, the police returned with Ellen and Tom. The backyard was quiet. The pool looked ordinary again, blue and still beneath a pale sky. Greg and Nenah were never found. Daniel and Valerie never returned to the house, and the owner quietly rented it out again by the following summer. But Daniel would tell anyone who asked that the worst part was not what he saw in the water. It was what the water knew. Because once the deep end learns your name, it never forgets how to say it. Ending explanation. The pool never called its victims with the voice of a stranger. It searched their memories and found the one person each of them would risk everything to see again. Daniel heard his dead brother. Valerie heard her late father. Greg heard the father he had buried 9 years earlier, and Nenah heard the mother who had drowned when Nenah was young. The spirits may have looked and sounded real, but they were only bait. The pool used grief as a doorway, turning love, guilt, and unfinished goodbyes into an irresistible invitation to come closer. Greg was the first to surrender because he refused to believe the danger was real. When his father's swollen face appeared beneath the surface, Greg answered it aloud. That single word, Dad, gave the pool what it needed. By responding, Greg confirmed that the copied voice belonged to someone he loved. The pool learned how to control him, drew him away from the others, and replaced him with a dripping imitation at the glass door. Greg did not simply fall into the water. He followed the promise that his father was waiting for him below. Nenah had carried the pain of her mother's drowning for most of her life. The pool understood that her grief was deeper than her fear. After taking Greg, it combined both voices, making Nenah believe her husband and mother were trapped together beneath the deep end. Exhausted and emotionally broken, she entered a trance and walked outside. When she said their names, she accepted the illusion. The hand rising from the water did not need to chase her. Nenah had already stepped close enough to be taken, because the pool had transformed her worst loss into the hope of a reunion. Daniel and Valerie escaped, because they finally understood the pool's rules. The voices could imitate the dead, but they could not force anyone into the water without emotional permission. Valerie refused to accept her father's voice as real, even when it begged her for help. Daniel nearly surrendered when the pool spoke in his brother's voice, but Valerie held him back before he could answer or enter the deep end. They survived by choosing each other over the dead. Instead of following the voices, they broke physical contact with the property and ran through the gate together. The ending reveals that the pool does not merely remember the people who drowned inside it. It remembers everyone who listens. Greg and Nenah became part of its collection, giving it 2 more faces and 2 more voices to use against future renters. Daniel and Valerie escaped the house, but the pool still learned their names and discovered the grief hidden inside them. That is why Daniel remained haunted afterward. He understood that survival did not erase the connection. The deep end had studied them, and somewhere beneath its calm surface, it was still practicing their voices.
Thanks for watching.